Think tanks. God, I love them. Can't get enough of those ruddy think tanks. They're just brilliant. I love how they like how they do the thinking and stuff. Hang on a sec. What the fuck do think tanks actually do? Like, they sound cool, and they've got fancy names like the Institute for Economic Affairs, but who are they? What do they do? And how do they get paid to do the things they do? Well, hang on to your metaphorical balls, or actual balls if you like, because today we're going to take a look at it. Let's start by getting the basics out of the way. A think tank is, simply put, a group of people that get together to do research into subjects they are interested in. I know it sounds vague, but that's because it is. It's just a term used to describe anyone doing research into anything. Some think tanks are big, some are small. Some get tens of millions of pounds of funding every year, others get a pittance. According to the Overton blog, there are over 200 think tanks in the UK and 11,000 globally. It's important that I explain at the very start here that most places that attempt to explain what a think tank is, such as Study Smarter, explains that their role is to research topics that might help inform the government when it comes to shaping policy and to raise awareness of an issue. While their initial function was for earnest intellectuals to provide research and analysis into the field they have an expertise in, it's clear now that the water is not clear. The divide between think tanks and politics has eroded over years of abuse, to the point where videos such as these, aimed at simply showing the workings of these groups, are nigh on impossible for normal people to understand. Or at least, that's my excuse for why this video has taken forever to release, so, my bad. It's also worth noting that most think tanks are actually registered not as companies, but as charitable organisations. That makes them tax exempt, which I'm okay with for impartial people doing impartial things, but it also means that their primary source of income is through two mediums. The first is via donations, and the second is by being commissioned to produce a report on a given subject. Again, this isn't necessarily a bad thing, but when you're producing work that can influence political policy, you are incentivized to appease those that donate to your cause. But geez, that should be fairly obvious, right? If you're receiving large donations from any particular company, we can see that. Well, actually, smartass, no we can't. There is no requirement for any think tanks to declare any donations made to them. Then there's also the fact that the lobbying groups can just request that a think tank produces a report on their behalf, and we'll see examples of this process being manipulated in this video too. It's where these minor little niggles hit reality that we start to see the many problems with it, so let's just take a look at a few examples. The Institute of Economic Affairs, IEA, bills itself to be the UK's original free market think tank, along with about a dozen other free market think tanks. It is, at its core, attempting to extol the virtues of a free market, which is to say a market that is influenced as little as possible by the government. Not bad in theory, it's a perfectly reasonable thing to want to research how free markets impact the performance of a country, and the Charity Commission that oversees what these guys can legally do while still claiming charitable status prevents them, or at least should be preventing them, from attempting to directly influence policy with its work. The problem is that the Charity Commission, at least when it comes to regulating think tanks, is a total and complete crock of shit-covered fucking bulldick. In 2018, the IEA was caught offering US donors access to British government ministers in return for some donations. If they would be so kind as to pledge £35,000 to the IEA, they would return the favour by organising a private meeting with Brexit minister and complete cunt Steve Baker to discuss trade deals between the US and UK in a post-Brexit Britain. Also in 2018, the IEA met with representatives of the National Casino Industry Forum, NCIF, to discuss an incomplete report they were working on about the role of casinos in the UK. The report was published sometime after their meeting and called for more casinos in the UK, and just days later, they received an £8,000 donation from the NCIF. Despite their best attempts to keep their funding private, it's now known that the IEA have seen substantial funding from tobacco companies, the oil and gas company BP, as well as the alcohol industry, the sugar industry, and even US-based climate change deniers. You know, the good guys. In their defense, a spokesperson said that these donations don't influence the result of their research, so I'm sure you'll join me in taking their word for it and not asking any further questions. You know, like the Charity Commission did. If you've ever heard the words 55 Tufton Street thrown about by political pundits, it's probably in reference to the meetings that take place there between senior politicians, lobby groups, and think tanks. The IEA is based just round the corner, along with several other right-wing think tanks that espouse free market fundamentalism. Again, basically the idea that if you just let the markets work with as little regulation as possible, this will be maximally beneficial to everyone. Others refer to this gaggle of think tanks and lobbying groups as the Tufton Street Network, and it's worth me showing you just how partisan and politically motivated these groups are. Remember Liz Truss? Full name Lizard Truss? You know, old Lizzie Pork Markets Truss. Well, she's been a big fan of these think tanks for a while now, and the mini-budget announced by Kemakwasi Kwarteng was, for the most part, pieced together using policy prescriptions written up by the supposedly academic and impartial think tanks like the IEA. In fact, their Director General, Mark Littlewood, released a statement telling everyone just how fucking brilliant it was that the richest in the country would be getting more tax breaks. Just so we're absolutely clear, the man advocating for a free market doesn't understand why the budget he supported had completely collapsed the UK's market. If that doesn't make you trust his economic prescriptions, I don't know what would. This mini-budget, if you've forgotten, is likely the reason why you're paying substantially more on your mortgage, and the majority of the £45 billion in completely unfunded tax cuts would only have been in favour to the very richest amongst us. While we're on the subject of Mark Littlewood, he was also recorded telling an undercover reporter back in 2018 that anyone that funds the IEA could get access to government ministers, and that the IEA was, quote, in the Brexit influencing game. Bear in mind that this is a charity that should not be attempting to directly influence political policymaking. The IEA was, in response, swiftly and decisively given an entire warning from the Charity Commission. In another Brexit-related cock-up, the IEA published a report on how they believed Brexit should be handled. They not only published a report that the Charity Commission deemed unacceptably partisan, but they also held a launch event for it, attended by Conservative MPs David Davis and Jacob Rees-Mogg, and Labour MP Gisela Stewart. The Charity Commission also showed concern about the IEA's growing political activity. They were issued with another warning and were told to remove the report from their website. The warning was then repealed once they removed it. I don't know how you repeal a warning, but fuck it. I don't know how to explain this bit, but I'll talk slow, just in case anyone from the Charity Commission is watching. Just because somebody removed a report from their website, it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist anymore. It's already out there in the world. Trying to stop it now is like trying to shove a fart back up your bum. It's just not how it works. The end result is that the IEA released their partisan report complete with a full-on fucking launch event, and they still get to operate as a charity with no repercussions. Not even a warning, because they fucking repealed it. The political connections to this organisation are also never-ending. Here's just a few of the links that I just jotted down with regards to the IEA alone. Dominic Raab's book launch in 2009 was hosted at the offices of the IEA, and he spoke at their birthday celebrations in 2015 too. He says that the IEA inspired his thinking to co-write his second book, Britannia Unchained, in which he advocates the abolition of several workers' rights and refers to British workers as being among the worst idlers. That very book was also co-written by Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng, who both have deep ties to Tufton Street themselves. Since you brought her up, Liz Truss has spoken at more IEA gatherings than any other MP. She hired the former communications director for the IEA, Ruth Porter, as a special advisor when she was Environment Secretary in 2014. She hired her again in 2016, and once again in 2022 as her Deputy Chief of Staff. After Liz's long, extensive, and very long tenure as Prime Minister, she gave Ruth a life peerage. There are also slightly more obscured links to our dodgy politicians too. Stick with me, I promise it'll piss you off. So, there's a guy called Shankar Singham. Shankar is an Oxford-educated guy that spent his time in the US as a lobbyist before crossing the pond into the UK after the referendum in 2016. From here, he worked as the head of the Special Trade Commission of the Legatum Institute, another Tufton Street-adjacent pro-Brexit think tank founded by a Dubai-based billionaire. The Legatum Institute, much like the IEA, worked overtime to undermine Brexit negotiations purely in an attempt to influence the outcome in favour of their 30 or so completely anonymous donors, allegedly, but definitely. From there, he packed up and moved to, you guessed it, the IEA. Here, he began leading the new International Trade and Competition Unit. This gave him the perfect platform to, let's say, network with various donors and politicians in a totally organic and not underhanded way. Let me explain this as simply as possible. Places like the Legatum Institute and the IEA, both of which employed Shanker during these moments of controversy, would cultivate relationships with politicians, like for example the members of the ERG, Jacob Rees-Mogg, David Davis, Steve Baker, all those cunts, and would solicit donations for access to those people. The IEA gets paid, the politician gets support from the think tank, and the donors get to bend the ear of people that are influencing our politics. Everyone's a winner. Except for you, you get lied to and rinsed out so they can make more money, obviously. You want examples? Okay, fine. Back in his Legatum Institute days, Singham had 5 separate meetings with the department for exiting the European Union, led by David Davis. These meetings were not disclosed, and despite repeated calls to release the minutes from these meetings, they have not been released. This is important because, bear in mind, these are officials and ministers at the absolute forefront of political decision-making. It's not like any old twat can just book an hour in their calendar, you know? He's been pulled up at least twice by the Charity Commission for not adhering to their rules around lobbying, but clearly this commission is about as useful as a cock-flavoured lollipop because all they seem to do is dish out fucking warnings. The more I think about it, the more I wonder why a think tank would ever really need to interact with our politicians. Just publish your report and fuck off, you know? Why in the world would Shanker Singham need to meet with a very particular group of ministers in order to produce bipartisan reports on his assessment of Brexit? In May 2018, Brexit ballbag Steve Baker met with the E Foundation, a US-based think tank that promised to pour hundreds of thousands of dollars into the IEA to campaign on Brexit. That story was exposed by the same Greenpeace workers that recorded Mark Littlewood, who we mentioned before was the director of the IEA, as saying that he and Shanker had facilitated conversations between Brexit ministers and several US-based donors lobbying for the fossil fuel, agriculture, and real estate industries. Again, the good guys. In 2018, after Esther McVey became the Minister for Work and Pensions, she met up with none other than Mark Littlewood to discuss how they could be of use to one another. And look, I get it. I'm sure some politicians would talk to some members of think tanks at one point or another. The point is that politicians should interact with think tanks irregularly and in a wholly transparent manner. There should be minutes. Meetings should all be declared and made public. People like Shanker Singham, who's built a career as being known as an international broker of political access, can do anything they want with no visibility of who is funding them. But maybe I need to convince you further, so let's take another example. The Centre for Policy Studies, CPS, is another one of those think tanks that likes to make out it's just the pinnacle of independence. They're just academics, interested in studying. What's this politics you speak of? Never heard of it, mate. We're just a group of intellectuals that want to make the world a better place. In reality, the level of political activity these people engage in would put half of our MPs to shame. Let's take a look at the board members for a second. The chairman of the CPS is Lord Michael Spencer. He's the billionaire businessman that has donated several millions of pounds over the years to the Conservative Party, and even served as their treasurer between 2006 and 2010. He's a Conservative member of the House of Lords, and is also the chairman of the Conservative Party Foundation. That's a group that seeks to build an endowment fund to help finance the Conservative Party, but I trust that good old Mikey Spencer has absolutely no skin in the game and is simply interested in doing some unbiased research. We also have Sir Graham Brady, a Conservative MP and the current chairman of the 1922 Committee, a sort of Illuminati for Tories. We've got the head honcho of the construction equipment manufacturer JCB, Lord Anthony Bamford. He's a billionaire lord of the land that has donated millions to the Conservative Party over the years. Sir Ben Elliott also has done his fair share of time as the Conservative Party chairman during the 2019 election. Speaking of, we also have Rachel Wolf on the board, who co-authored the 2019 Conservative Party manifesto and has previously advised the Conservative Party and Boris Johnson while he was mayor. That manifesto was also co-written by Robert Colville, also from the CPS. Lord Jonathan Hopkin Hill of Orford is also a board member and a Conservative peer, formerly the leader of the House of Lords, and has seen more boards than Theseus. But let's not stop there. Pop quiz time. On which street do you think that the CPS is based on? If you guess Tufton Street, you get to press the like button because you're absolutely correct to fucking mundo. Let's keep going. The chairman of the CPS, Lord Spencer, owns about £18 million worth of shares in the oil and gas company Deltic. The CPS have lobbied extensively on the subject of minimising taxation on oil and gas companies, as well as speeding up approval for further oil and gas projects. They even wrote a report in December 2013 called Why Every Serious Environmentalist Should Favour Fracking. They've also published works by Robert Darwall, a research fellow at another climate change-denying think tank called the Global Warming Policy Foundation, or CUNTS for short. These cunts are also based in, wait for it, 55 Tufton Street. But geez, how does this relate to the CPS's involvement with the government? Well, pop quiz time again. Which company do you believe was awarded new licenses to drill baby drill in the North Sea this year? If you guessed Deltic, the company which Lord Spencer owns almost 19% of, you'd be Spotty Dog, my pedigree chum. In fact, DeSmog revealed that 5 members of the CPS board have shares in the oil and gas industry, which is bloody lucky considering that they seem to be consistently publishing research that is favourable to their investments, despite the overwhelming scientific consensus to the contrary. Fuck it, we're on a roll, let's do another one. Policy Exchange is known as one of the most influential think tanks in the UK, and while it, like all the others, claims to be a politically neutral think tank, it's anything but. Their first chairman was Conservative Minister and Andrew Tate's Chin's dad, Michael Gove. It was also the workplace of suspected human Rishi Sunak, Chris Skidmore MP, Conservative peer Lord David George Hamilton Frost, and the uber-Christian mental conspiracy theorist Father Calvin Robinson. It was created in 2002 by Conservative MPs Francis fucking Maud, fuck knows, Archie Norman and Nick Bowles, who wasn't an MP at the time but became one later. Policy Exchange was the favoured think tank of Boris Johnson, which explains its relentless hypothesising about whether or not Brexit will turn us into a merely brilliant country or a perfect one. Who knows, I guess. I suppose if the last few years have taught us anything, it's that it's up in the air and all still to play for. They boldly claim that a new poll finds that the monarchy helps to unify the country post-Brexit, except that when you actually look at the poll results, it shows that the amount of people that think it unifies us versus the amount that either don't know or think it divides us is about half the population, which is literally the furthest you can ever get from unification. If we pop over to openDemocracy's Who Funds You page, Policy Exchange gets the lowest rating for transparency. We do know, however, that they are funded in some amount by Drax, the energy company, not Destroyer, Energy UK, E.ON, and Cadent. These are all different companies and trade associations in the energy, oil, and gas sector. And it's important that we know this, because when they produce reports that call protesters from Extinction Rebellion subversive and extremist, you can't help but wonder if the cart is leading the horse a little bit. I mean, I'm not a fan of traffic or wasting soup, but is it really an extremist movement? Here's a fun bit of the report, by the way. They say that, quote, given the extreme objectives of Extinction Rebellion, it is not inconceivable that some on the fringes of the movement might, at some point, break with organisational discipline and engage in violence. That report was written by Tom Wilson and Richard Walton, and that sentence is a laughably bad attempt at poisoning the well. It's like if I said that Tom Wilson and Richard Walton both have noses and cocks, so it's not inconceivable that they might like to spend the evening snorting bags of cocaine and trying to suck themselves off. Who cares if it's right, which it definitely is. It's just conceivable is all I'm saying, but they definitely do. Allegedly. But definitely. What? Just recently, it was reported by DeSmog that Policy Exchange were approached by the Climate Leadership Council, CLC, to produce a report on carbon pricing to help inform our own climate change legislation in the UK. The CLC is a US-based non-profit comprised of various leaders at BP, Shell, Ford and General Motors, and Microsoft. It's reported that BP's head of group policy said of this Policy Exchange report in a leaked email that, quote, there will be ample opportunity for UK-focused CLC members like BP and Shell to input themselves and shape the internal thinking. The useful and definitely effective Charity Commission has yet to respond to these leaked emails. Now, I don't know what the required burden of proof would be to be able to call these people money-hungry, grotesque, pustulating sores on the crusted rectum of the chafed, bleeding arse of humanity, but I'm pretty confident it's been met. Of course, we've barely scratched the surface of what these think tanks are spending their time doing. Remember, there are over 200 in the UK alone. Not all are bad, but the ones that are bad are just comically bad. We haven't even covered places like the Adam Smith Institute, a think tank that impartially pushes for a reduction of duties on the tobacco industry while being funded by the tobacco industry. Or how about the Global Warming Policy Foundation, the think tank created by former Chancellor and Rishi Sunak's personal hero, Nigel Lawson? It was created to push back against the nerds that reckon global warming is real by a former minister that served under Thatcher who probably definitely wasn't politically motivated. Thinking about it, Nigel was so in the pocket of oil and gas companies that his daughter, Nigella Lawson, even used oil and gas to cook with in her hit series Nigella Bites. Coincidence? Fuck no, it's not. Again, my issue isn't that think tanks exist. It makes perfect sense to allow people to go and research whatever they like and to make those findings public. It definitely helps to inform our ministers and the public, as well as freeing up time MPs and their teams would otherwise spend just trawling data. I'm also not mad at them for being given a charitable status if it helps alleviate the financial burden that may be placed on smaller think tanks that have something good to contribute. My issue is that the charitable status should be earned, and their activities should be moderated. It's not good enough to give think tanks a charitable status, then allow them to take undeclared money from wherever they like without limit. There must be complete transparency if trust is to be restored, because hopefully I've done a good enough job here to show you what the consequences are if we don't have that transparency and accountability. So what do we do from here? Well, it's my humble opinion that we should have a much more robust system of managing think tanks. Here's a few no-brainer moves I think we can make. 1. Politicians should declare any meeting held between themselves or their staff and any representative of any think tank. 2. Minutes should be provided for those meetings. 3. If think tanks are to benefit from a charitable status, then the public should have the right to see how they are funded. To that end, any donations made over £500 in a single year, either cumulatively or in one sum, should be made visible to the public. A lot of think tankers, Cockney rhyming slang for wankers, will say that they don't want to disclose their donors for fear of their personal safety. Much like our friends at the Policy Exchange before, they're just concerned about the likes of Extinction Rebellion becoming rabid, feral animals that end up waterboarding them with a tin of Heinz tomato soup for donating a tenner to the IEA. I'd say if you're genuinely worried for your safety, I'd recommend donating to less obviously corrupt think tanks that exist to serve your specific financial interests, but I'm a bit of a cunt like that. Oh, and while we're at it, it wouldn't hurt to empower the Charity Commission to do a bit more than just shake their fist in the air when someone does something fucked up. Nobody intending to benefit from bending the rules ever stopped because of a verbal warning, so we need to do more than just sit idly by and let the problem fester. Thank you for watching. If you liked this video, please do like and subscribe, it really helps. Quick note before I go, I know this video has been in the works for a while, but it's honestly been a real fucking bastard to research, and it would not have been possible without the amazing work being done by openDemocracy and DeSmog, both of whom I've linked in the description, so please go and check out their articles and support them if you can. A huge thank you to my ambiguous and thoroughly patient supporters on Patreon. I really do appreciate your support, guys. It means a hell of a lot. If you'd like to support, you can do so from just £1 a month. The link is in the description. Love you. Bye-bye.